So, hey, this is Benjamin Boyce. Let's get back to Laurier University. Hope you're having a good holiday week. So, we all know about the Lindsay Shepherd incident where Pimlott and Rambukkana and Joel took Lindsay aside based on no formal complaint, but based on somebody overhearing something said at the Rainbow Centre, or the Rainbow Centre at the university campus. Now, the Rainbow Centre is one of these rooms that you can go to if you possess a certain identity, or if you have an affinity for certain identities. That you can go to these rooms and you can, share your struggles as X, Y, or Z identity. And all these different groups are kind of under the umbrella of the Diversity and Equity Office, which is affectionately known as the DEO. And that is run by a woman named Laura May Lindo, who's recently elected to be a representative in Canada's NDP, National Democratic Party. So what I want to kind of start to do as we go forward with this is kind of to examine the DEO, examine Laura May Lindo, and kind of draw connections between the way that Rambukkana and Pimlott and Joel were acting towards Lindsay and the official stance, the official policies of this DEO. So for today, we're going to look at kind of like a promo video that the DEO released called Laurier Publishes the Eraser Post-Summit Report. Now, the Eraser, or E-Race-er Summit, the first one was held in 2016, and then the second one was held in 2017, and this promo comes from the second one that was held. So, here we go.
No one wants to admit that they have a problem with racism. No one wants to admit that they have problems with gender and sexual violence. You can't address a problem that you're not willing to admit that you have.
So, no one wants to admit that they have a problem with race or gender. What does that actually mean? What she's saying is that nobody wants to admit that they're racist or sexist or phobic. Nobody wants to do that. So, right out the gate, there's assumed guilt. We see that with Lindsay Shepherd. Even showing a video by Jordan Peterson makes you assumably guilty of everything that Jordan Peterson is assumably guilty of. The reverse side of this statement that nobody wants to admit that we have this problem is that our very existence as the Diversity and Equity Office is under threat if we don't prove that there is a problem. Like, our job is basically relies on the fact that we get people to recognize the problem. And that is something that pops up over and over again in this promo.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we see is that the denial of their experiences as racialized beings and their marginalization, because we don't quite understand how systemic racism operates on a day-to-day level.
The weird language, racialized being or racialized person, is actually a part of the laws, and it's another social justice thing where they need a different word because the word that was being used doesn't exactly pinpoint the problem that they're getting at, or is assumably, if you're a minority, that has a negative connotation, right? Or if you're black or Muslim, that has a negative connotation, so we call them racialized beings, which contextualizes the positionality of what it means to be an otherness within the framework of Canadian society. Let's listen to it again.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we see is that the denial of their experiences as racialized beings and their marginalization, because we don't quite understand how systemic racism operates on a day-to-day level.
So she repeats the assumption that this problem exists, and that the first problem is getting others to recognize the problem. The second is that nobody understands that how this problem works, this systemic racism works. Now, there's two ways to interpret that. Either she doesn't understand how it works, which goes to say that this problem is very ambiguous and we're still trying to figure out this problem, but we know that it exists. Or secondly, She knows how it exists, like this diversity and equity office. They know how this problem exists, this systemic racism exists, and how it operates and how it works in the world. Nobody else does. And so our job is to convince you that there is a problem, and then two, convince you that we have the solutions. Nobody else has the solutions, which I find very underhanded.
When I talk about diversity, we feel more comfortable. When I talk about racism, it's kind of scary. But we have to go there, because the issue isn't diversity. The actual issue is racism on campus. And we have our students telling us that.
So the issue isn't diversity and inclusion. The issue is racism. So what basically she's trying to do with the language games is to switch the language from hyphenating a solution, which would be diversity or inclusion, which has problems in it, but like that's like a positive oriented. We want to extend the resources that we have to a wide variety of our society, because when we do that, that lifts everybody up, which means that everybody can get even lifted higher because everybody's lifting everybody up. That's the solution. Diversity would be a solution orientation. She wants to switch it from a diversity orientation to a racism orientation, right? And she says that's scary and that's a problem. Nobody wants to talk about it. We get clenched in our stomach and stuff like that. She's switching from solution to the problem, to hyphenating the problem, which goes to say that this promo is over and over reiterating that there's this problem, people are talking about this problem, we're here to solve this problem. And you don't even know that you have this problem because you don't want to admit that you have this problem. That's how deep the problem is, right?
Often when we are trying to address issues of racism, the hardest task for us is to make it visible, bring it to the table, and make a case for why it constitutes as an act of racism.
See, so they need to convince you that racism exists, and then they need to go through and sift through exactly what behaviors are racist. And because there's increasingly less and less overt racism, what they have to do is start to police language. That's why this whole thing with language is coming up, is because the gross, very obvious racial attitudes and behaviors are being diminished as a matter of course, I would argue, because of a liberal society is working to kind of liberalize our view of what's acceptable and kind of understand that people can be different and that we do share commonalities even within our differences. I think that liberal society is just naturally doing that, but these people, they have degrees and they have a lot of money coming in to solve this problem, and because the problem isn't gross, they have to switch the way that they're dealing with the problem into policing thought, policing language. And she basically just reiterated that we need to go through and define exactly how this racism is working in the way that you blinked at me the other day, or the words that you mouthed, or the swastika that was painted on the bathroom stall.
Indigenous people just keep falling behind because it's not moving fast enough for us.
This is another common theme among all these diversity and equity and social justice movements, is that there is a problem, we need to fix the problem, and this is a call to urgency. It's not moving fast enough. It's not moving fast enough. We need to go faster and faster and faster. This is a really immediate problem, right? And then you're like, well, what is the immediate problem? They're like, well, the way that you're speaking to me. That's the problem. We need to stop that. We need to stop having these debates. So you see that this attitude that manifested within the Lindsay Shepherd, Inquisition was built and promulgated by the Diversity and Equity Office, which is built and formed upon critical race theory, which, as you might expect, Laura May Lindo, she got her degree in critical race theory. She has some papers out on that too.
So you'll hear similar stories of racism happening on other university campuses, and you'll see institutions try and fix it within their community, but it's not working.
This is really interesting. She says that, so this problem is everywhere. It's at all these other campuses, but the solutions aren't anywhere. But we have the solutions. I mean, that's the undercurrents. Like, no, we have the solutions because the solutions over there aren't really working, right? But she doesn't back this up with any data other than stories. People are talking about this stuff, and we need to keep on recentering this stuff. So it really is a promo. But what's behind the curtain? That's the real question.
Something else that we hear from students who come forward who are racialized is that some of...
Racialized. You are racialized. I have been racialized.
The expected pathways of support aren't going to work for them.
So we need to do something else. The expected pathways of support aren't working for them, so we need to do something else. And what are the solutions now that we have the problem? Now we're centering the problem. What exactly is the solution to the systemic implicit problem?
We often need to change the power structures. We need to reflect those changes in policies and the way we are creating spaces for students and staff and faculty on campuses.
We need to change the power structures. They go right to it. That's what they're doing. She's saying exactly what they're doing. They're not even advertising. I mean, I think that the problem is a bunch of hootenanny, but their solution and their path forward is not. And they're being very open about it. They want to reassemble the power structures. They want to reassemble in this case, the university, around a social justice agenda. And what does that exactly mean? That means that policing people's language, policing the problem, making sure that everybody knows that there's a problem, that we're all guilty of it, and therefore we need to submit to the solution of being trained and going through all these different trainings and submitting ourselves to these interpretations of the world that are not based on like, look, there's all these different interpretations of the world. No. It's based on critical race theory, that there's one problem in the world. There's the oppressed, the oppressor. And we are going to develop our entire community, our entire learning environment around the fact now that everything is divided between the oppressed and the oppressor. And we need to switch that around. We need to make the oppressed the oppressor and the oppressor the oppressed.
And it's not just our students. Faculty and staff are also saying to us that they're experiencing racism on campus.
I think we often tend to think about Islamophobia in a US context, but not think about how we are implicated in our own history of Islamophobia on Canadian soil.
The more we think about the diversity of our student body, the more we realize that we have to take these issues seriously. And if we stop talking about it, then there's this potential that we have students, faculty, and staff members that are slipping through the cracks, that aren't getting support that they need.
So this is another appeal. Well, one, it's interesting because now she uses the rhetoric of diversity in order to hyphenate the problem. So while the diversity was the goal, now it's equity, right? Now it's the goal is to root out this problem, is to concentrate our efforts on anti-racism and anti-oppression. Instead of making people more open and more accepting of others, no, we need to really root out the evil that's separating people. And how do you do that exactly? Secondly,
stop talking about it, then there's this potential that we have students, faculty, and staff members that are slipping through the cracks.
Secondly, it's another appeal to the immediacy. If we stop talking about this problem, then people are going to fall through the cracks because people won't be able to know how to deal with these really gross situations, like gross as in heavy, really obvious situations of implicit bias without our help. We need to keep on talking about it and keep on centering the problem over and over and over and over and over again. This is their whole raison d'etre. And this goes right back to why Pimlott and Rambukkana and Joel took Lindsay Shepherd aside. Because even having the debate legitimizes the possibility that there are other ways of viewing the world, and therefore delegitimizes their proposition that their way of viewing the world is the most important and central way of viewing the world.
If these problems are coming to campus, we're not just going to be able to fix them here. The effort has to be across school boards, built into early years curriculum.
They're being honest again right here, that the problem isn't just in the university, it's in all of society. And so what we need to do is to implement our solutions at every level of society, starting with, presumably, with preschool. Teaching critical race theory to preschoolers. I'm sure it's already going on right now, but they're basically saying that's their goal.
I always worry that it's going to drag, it's going to take too long, that we're going to lose another generation before we get things in place sufficiently that we're making a real difference and that we have enough momentum to keep it going.
This is another appeal to immediacy and to keeping the momentum up, keeping the pitch, the fervor alive, that racism is a problem, that we need to pinpoint it, that we need to go through and radically root out any sort of dissent against our, fixing of the world and the implementing of the utopia. And the thing is it's really difficult to critique this stuff until the problems start arising, like they have at Evergreen and then at Laurier and then at other campuses. Like when you kind of listen to this stuff without seeing the result of it, it's like, oh, these people are trying to do good things, and they're making an appeal to my compassionate nature, and they're kind of making to appeal like, yeah, there are these groups that are downtrodden, and there's these problems that we have, and how do we solve these problems? How do we bring up the people who are down? How do we do that, right? And they're approaching it in a way that seems like it's all right, and that's cool, until you see that the implementation of it is actually rather horrific, that they're actually trying to implement more and more control over how we go about naturally just getting acquainted with one another. That's why I think that it's actually antisocial and injustice in its application.
It's going to take time, and it's going to take consistent, integrated approaches.
I think that it's super important for us to have these conversations so that we can also legitimize the voices of people that are actually telling us that this is what's happening to them.
We need to do this so we can legitimize the voices of the people who are saying that this is a problem to them. Now, that is interesting because I would give the benefit of the doubt to somebody regardless. If they say that I'm having this hard experience and I need help with that, I would naturally say, okay, let me hear what you have to say and let's go forward and see if there's any solutions. But to have an actual apparatus going around and legitimizing these issues, legitimizing these voices, that's when I start to have a problem with it, because they're only going to be legitimizing voices that line up with their presuppositions. And what is their presupposition? That race is alive and well, and it might not be obvious, but it's still there. It's systemic, it's hazy, it's around every corner, it's in everybody, and we don't even want to admit that. That's how bad of a problem it is. Now, with people with that set of assumptions going around and legitimizing voices, they're only going to legitimize the voices that actually prove that racism exists, that prove that systemic racism is thriving everywhere. So that's when I have a problem with this whole legitimization tactic that they're taking.
When they're developing large-scale strategies, your mental health strategy, your sexual violence prevention strategy, that it is integral to that strategy that we spend some time thinking about racism.
This is very important for her. For Laura May Lindo, this statement right here, that she says that it's integral, that no matter what we're doing, we're always thinking about race. It's very important to her. And why? Because she's building a career out of that. There's so much personal stake that she has in racism being an issue. And I'll show you just a little bit of a speech that she made while she was trying to get elected to the NDP representation. So here's from a speech of Laura May Lindo.
Fear of influence. So personally, I've made a choice to go into the political arena because what I've realized, I've made the choice because what I've realized is that we need to have people that look like me, that sound like me, that approach the world like me in those spaces. Because when the young people come into my office and they sit on the couch, I have a couch, feel free to come by, but they come, they sit on the couch, they're hurting, and they're crying. One of the first things they say is that they can't even believe that they can find a black woman that they can come to with their problems.
So it's essential to her entire career that her identity, which is a black woman, is front and center, and that racism also exists. Because if there's racism and she's a black woman fighting racism, then she has a job. If she's a black woman and there's no racism, then what's her platform? Like, oh, I'm actually going to help society? I'm going to actually get some things done? No, her issue is racism. And so she needs racism in order for her job to matter, in order for her position to have strength. So in a way, this whole anti-oppression, anti-racism stuff, they really rely on the swastikas being painted in bathrooms. And actually, the first Eraser Summit was said to be started up because somebody wrote a swastika on in a hallway, and that's what got the ball moving for that. And you see that at Evergreen, and you see it over and over and over again in all these colleges and stuff, that the people are waiting for the smallest incident of discrimination to happen, and then right away they're mobilized, they're ready, they're poised for it, and then they get all these resources, and then they get all this power just from the slightest little thing. And so what they do is like, well, that slightest little thing's not there, so we need to constantly have a conveyor belt of oppression in order for this entire mechanism to operate. So I think that it's doomed from the start to actually need to go around and have a witch hunt and call people homophobic and call people transphobic, because without that, they don't have a reason to exist. They don't have a job. They don't have a livelihood.
I feel like that will add another level and layer of integrity to our post-secondary education that we need when we're in an actual battle for racial justice on our campuses.
An actual battle. An actual battle. An actual battle. Like an actual battle. Like, what does she mean by that? An actual battle. I'm sorry, I'm just repeating that over and over again because there's no people going around with clubs and bats. There's not an actual battle. It's a metaphorical battle. But she needs it to be as actual as possible, but not actually actual, because then she wouldn't have a job, because like her job is predicated on being in a safe place. Her entire job is predicated on the fact that she doesn't live in a war zone, because all this stuff would not matter if she lived in an actual war zone. If there were actual people with tanks coming through, nobody would have time for a diversity and equity office. So she needs it just actual enough to feed her whole scheme, but not actual enough to destabilize the resources that she's living off of, right? So I really think that this is the problematic in the entire Laurier University story. And I'm going to go through in the future, coming up here, I'm going to go through and look closer at this Eraser event and go into some of the members of it and keep on chipping away at Laurier. Bye.